Hello and welcome to the Unblocked Podcast Network. Coach here with Brian and our special guest, Todd J Anson, Esquire, Michigan fan, attorney, Red Sox fan, all of the above and more. Todd, we appreciate you being with us today.
Pleasure to be here. Pleasure to be here, Coach and Brian.
Brian, where you there, Brian?
Todd?
There you go.
Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me?
You're good.
Todd, can you just tell us briefly about, Coach kind of gave you an introduction, but can you tell us briefly about, I know when you say to an accomplished person, can you be brief about your accomplishments? It's a hard thing to do, and some people have trouble talking about themselves, but you've always been one of the most interesting guys I've ever talked to, and can you just kind of give us some of your background?
I think you consider the most remarkable thing about me to be, Brian, the fact that I talked my wife into honeymooning at Fenway and Yankee Stadium back in 1976 after we got married. But I grew up in the Midwest in College Town, Mount Pleasant, Michigan, where Central Michigan's located. The great, legendary, and soon to be inducted into the College Football Hall of Fame, Coach Roy Kramer, SEC commissioner, who essentially gave birth to the BCS, was our neighbor, and his son Steve and I were Mount Pleasant High football captains back in the day and remained friends, and went to law school at the University of Michigan, and then out and have spent the last 43 years professionally out in California. Although, as you are all too well aware, I was instrumental in the visioning and the delivery of getting Jim Harbaugh, my longtime friend and neighbor, in Coronado, California, where he finished his career with the Chargers as quarterback, and then ended up coaching the University of San Diego and rejuvenating their program. The vision was to long-term vision was to get Jim back to Michigan. And obviously, we were successful at doing that. And he's got the program back on top. There have been at least 3 books, including John Bacon's End Zone, that was a New York Times bestseller, written about that, and my involvement and the involvement of many others. But that's basically a thumbnail sketch. I'm a tech lawyer by training, was a young managing partner of the second largest law firm in California during the 80s and 90s tech boom. Cisco Systems was my company. Our law firm had taken them public, so created them from infancy. And they created a huge amount of opportunity for me and my family personally. I later went into business, partnered with them, and built about 5.5 million square feet of office campus space around the world for them. So that's when my eyes really started to open up. So I'm a guy who gets to spend, people ask me, how do you spend your time? And I basically have found myself answering, I have the luxury of not spending a minute a day doing anything other than things that I'm passionate about. So I think that sort of captures me, Brian.
I agree. And I'll tell you, you were somebody that was very instrumental. And we had Dan Lust on an earlier show to get the Big Ten to play through Twitter, you and several others. I can't wait till John U. Bacon does that book because Kevin Warren, you guys saw it as an injustice and kind of teamed up to say, well, if everybody else can play during COVID, why isn't the Big Ten playing?
Yeah, Kevin actually wasn't the heavy so much there as the 2 presidents, Mark Schlissel of the University of Michigan, my own alma mater, and Northwestern's president, both MDs, the only 2 MDs at the time. It was an odd confluence of circumstances because we had the COVID fear spreading around in early 2020. Of course, the football season doesn't kick off until about Labor Day, September of 20. We knew a lot more than we allowed ourselves to be conscious of in terms of the myocarditis risk, and which was manageable with the young student athletes. And I think the science has proven, I'm not going to get into too much of that the risk posed by the vax on young males may actually be greater than the risk of myocarditis on the same student athletes. But I had a flood of unsolicited reach outs from cardiologists at the U of M hospital and other places saying this is craziness to be shutting down the football season. I immediately had the perspective that it was a sacred American institution that needed to be protected, maybe one of the last true meritocracies. So it was much bigger than just a health concern for me. My view was if you kill off football one time, you will have the ability, it'll be much easier the next time and the next time and the next time. So the barriers to doing that needed to be high. The scientific evidence supporting it needed to be much greater than it was. And I had unique access through some friends, who've been head NFL and Big Ten coaches to the input. Within 24 hours of the decision, we knew who had led that charge at the Big Ten president's meeting. And we began, I said to my wife, if I go public and start putting these things out on Twitter, kind of exposing the decision-making process behind the scene in defense of football, which we all love and respect everything great that it can do for us individually and a country, you need to be comfortable, Terry, that we're never going to be invited back into the president's box at U of M. And my wife is a trooper, total supporter. She said, hit launch, and off we went. And we started a campaign that I worked very vigorously on with Aiden Hutchinson's parents, Melissa and Chris, and the McCaffreys, Ed and Lisa, and their son Dylan, who was a freshman quarterback on the Michigan team at the time. We actually protest marched from the big house in Ann Arbor up State Street with Coach Harbaugh and Jack and Jackie, the Hutchinsons, Chris, Aiden, Lisa, Melissa, and the McCaffreys, Lisa, Ed, and Dylan, and others in masks up State Street. I would say about a mile, 3/4 of a mile up to the Diag in the middle of the Michigan campus where there was a rally. So, yeah, that was a tumultuous time. And I'm not sure we've still fully recovered from it.
Yeah, and I'll tell you one thing that I love about what you've done is, you speak out against the injustices, and we need more people like you that aren't afraid. And you asking your wife, is this okay to go ahead? But I think we're kind of became a society that we're afraid of the negative attention that it's going to draw to us. And unfortunately, sometimes you don't look at the bigger picture of what might come in with that. So could you talk to us a little bit about NIL?
Yeah, sure. So I have a different perspective than most on NIL. And I realize we got two Southern accents with me on this podcast, so I don't want to offend either one of you.
Let's go 1.5. I mean, Brian tries to do voice text, and it gets just garbled.
It's part North Central Ohio and part Mobile, Alabama. So my voice texts do not make any sense to Coach and our other partner Keith that's at work right now. So,
well, let me get out over my skis, as Brian has seen me do a lot of times, and just say that from my perspective, sitting with a 40-plus year vantage point on Big Ten football in particular, which is a number one passion, not the only one, and giving me perspective. So through that lens, recruiting has not been a level playing field throughout the 40 years since I graduated from law school. It's actually the imbalance was far greater tilted towards the South than I think America is willing to acknowledge. Just look at the participants in the Final Fours in college football, in the playoffs. What are they, like 14 of 16 are Southern teams or some ridiculous number like that? You can ask yourself, why is that? And I think I know the answer. I know that back in 2010, players, I know one player who's still active in the NFL, by the way, turned down $500,000 to attend a Southwestern Conference school to go to an SEC school. And, that just doesn't happen in Big Ten territory. And there's a reason why those schools have dominated. NIL to me offered the northern schools that tend to be much more law abiding, rules abiding. I'm not saying there aren't mistakes made there either. And Cheeseburger Gate might be an example of that. But the imbalance really could be addressed legally through NIL if it became legalized. That's point of view number one. It was to level the playing field. Second point of view, I've been a fan of professional athletics and college athletics for, since I was a kid in the 60s and 70s. And I was a witness to Curt Flood breaking the reserve clause in Major League Baseball in 68. And my childhood hero, Al Kaline, made 100,000 for the first time in 69 after the Tigers won the 68 pennant. At the same time, Mickey Mantle and Willie Mays are the superstars of the American and National League, and they're both making 130,000. Through my friend Tom House, the great Tom House, Nolan Ryan's, teammate, mentor, coach, Tom Brady, Drew Brees is, great mentor on throwing and mechanics and competitive psychology. I learned that his era at USC, Mickey Mantle and Willie Mays weren't even the highest paid professional athletes in the country in '69, because OJ was making as a running back about 120,000, per those stories, and OJ wasn't even the highest paid athlete on the USC campus. I think that Tim Morosevich, the great linebacker, was supposedly had a $200,000 deal. So when you learn, and I'm not criticizing those things. We have not lived by that kind of rule at Michigan over time. And maybe it was the hypocrisy was just as great then as it is today. But I see it more clearly now, and I blame the television network. So in 2005-06, every Big Ten team got about 5 or 6 million in TV revenue. And we were just coming off the old legacy TV rules of the 80s and into the 90s, where as a kid, Michigan could be on TV, national TV, twice a year when I was a kid. And that really obviously held the revenue growing opportunities down. But it weighted it in favor of the student athlete. I think the athlete part of the equation was much stronger than it can be today. Not that guys aren't working their tails off to get educated, and schools don't have terrific programs for academic support, whatever. But today that number is 57 million per school in the Big Ten. And by the way, the 57 million per school in the Big Ten. So if it were 60 million and there's 14 schools, about 840 million, a little over 800 million gets distributed out to the current 14 Big Ten schools. That is tax-free money. So we're all supporting that as taxpayers. And all of the stadium revenue that comes in to the universities, which at Michigan's probably a couple $100 million, and you'll see those annual rankings, which is ticket sales, luxury box sales, concessions, and merchandise. And all of those monies are tax-free, unlike the NFL, the NBA, Major League Baseball, and NHL, so forth. And then in addition to that, at schools like Michigan, you're pulling in probably on average something close to 100 to 250 million per year, tax-free through advancement, because of the prominence of your football program. So all in, there is nothing. The New York Yankees, the Rams in their new stadium, the Cowboys in Jerry Dome, none of them compare economically to a top college football program at a university, because all of those revenue sources are tax-free. Now, do I have a problem with that? No. I love football. I want to see it promoted. You guys, I know, feel the same way. The problem I have with it is all of that money is being made on the backs of the kids, the talent on the field. And, when Kurt Flood broke the reserve clause, making 30 or 100,000 was huge money in Major League Baseball in the late 60s. Within a year or two, you have guys like Catfish Hunter and Reggie Jackson and people like that jumping up to 800 grand a year. So I support NIL because it breaks the log jam. As a lawyer, I came to learn nobody wants to part with money that they already have control of because they've already mentally spent it, committed it, budgeted it, whatever. But if you can create a new source of revenue like NIL does from third parties, that should be the low-hanging fruit where you can share with the athletes. And I hope that explains it, Brian, but the economics have become so outrageously strong in favor of, the elite universities. Now, most schools are still losing money on football, right? I think there's only about 25 approximately per year that make money on it. And it's a way for me to reward the talent that brings these great opportunities to so many.
And one thing about NIL, where do you see it heading? I mean, there's talk of unionization. There was the basketball school up on the East Coast. I think there's some challenges out in California, and I could be wrong about that. But do you see unionization as something that could happen?
Well, yeah, and I would say shamefully because of the NCAA's mismanagement. So I'm not a big union guy. But interestingly enough, if you follow me on social media, you'll see that I support the players moving in that direction. And it's because it's one of the few good threats they can make to lever in to some of the pie. The odd hypocrisy of college football and high-end basketball, to me, is the fact that you've got the progressive universities led by progressive university presidents who are greedy and hoarding all of the money from athletics and refusing to share it. And the last I looked, I think 74.4% of the NFL talent was black talent. If you assume that anything close to 3/4 of the star talent in college football is the same, you can't avoid the race issue in the misallocation of all of the monies coming from college football, whether it's the media or the stadium concession, merch, whatever sales. So for me, it's gotten obscene. It's a great hypocrisy, and I think the players need to do whatever they can to command a slice of that pie. Now, do I think the NCAA? What do I think about the NCAA and its handling of it? It's gross negligence under President Mark Emmert. All they had to do was share some, and they got to define the sum: 10%, 25%, 2%. I pick a number and begin to share it in the last few years, and they could have preserved, the student athlete / amateur model that they are so invested in, but they wouldn't do it out of greed or lack of strategic.
You've thrown a whole load of hay on at least on a Southern boy here with that. I coached high school ball for 26 years as a head coach, and but the last 14 at one of the larger schools in Alabama. We had 76 guys sign college scholarships in that time, and we were a high minority population, and the struggles that they all went through in terms of, okay, you've got a scholarship, but you don't have spending money. A lot of them were full Pell Grant, so they at least got that. and had had a little bit of money here and there, but the greed, as you would say, all the way through. Kids that go to Division III schools or NAIA schools that get there and they're financially packaged. And so they're financially packaged, so they take their Pell Grant money, apply it, and then every year they raise the tuition at these schools on them and end up squeezing them out because they can't afford to go. They sort of take their dreams and use their dreams against them. And it's awful.
Absolutely. I mean, you trigger a great Jim Harbaugh story. So this is the character of the man that I've come to admire. So in his first year at USD, D1 AA non-scholarship USD, no scholarships. He sees a kid handing off footballs in Oakland at Oakland Tech to Marshawn Lynch. The kid happens to be Marshawn's cousin. His name is Josh Johnson. At the time he's 6'1", and a half, maybe 160 pounds, got a hose of an arm, really fast. And Jim tells me, I'm going to get that kid to play quarterback at USD, and he's going to play in the NFL. I thought Jim had lost his mind. USD had never had a guy invited to the combine, had never had an undrafted free agent. And Jim's telling me this little school that has a stadium smaller than my high school stadium at Mount Pleasant High in Michigan is going to play in the NFL. He's an inner city kid, can't afford. Then I remember very vividly, it was $42,000 a year to attend USD. And Jim tells him, the kid says, I can't afford it. Well, we'll help you try to get grants and, scholarships and things, but you'll only have to go into debt for 2 years because after your second year, I'll be able to help you get a scholarship to any school in the country in any conference, Oklahoma, schools like that. You're that good, I believe. And, of course, the kid, as a sophomore, lights it up. USD lights it up. Jim had a great 4-year run at USD. And he sits Josh down and he says, now, I'm watching carefully my friend Jim Harbaugh to see what he does when nobody's looking, right? Because I remember we never talked about that conversation again, but I'm paying attention. And Jim sits Josh down. I'll be danged if he doesn't say to him, Josh, it's time for you to leave. And Josh is incredulous, probably had forgotten the conversation. What do you mean, coach? I love it here. He says, I told you when I recruited you that if you played for me for 2 years here, you would establish yourself and I'd help you get a scholarship at one of the big time college programs. That day is here now. You've got to leave. And Josh says, Coach, I'm not leaving. And he stayed. But judge a man when nobody's looking.
Sure.
You see the real picture. That's the Jim Harbaugh that I've watched, and I love the fact that he's an outspoken champion for these athletes on NIL rights, on the one. Now, would anybody design the one and done, immediate eligibility transfer portal thing this way? If in a perfect world, no, of course they wouldn't. But I appreciate the fact that he is a champion of the individual athlete's rights. And it's just the problem is the damned adults. Sorry about that.
Not a problem.
The adults in the room have shown zero leadership. None. That's the NCAA. And it's up to them to figure out a system, given the laws that we now have in place and the guidelines. And they're still in denial. I was very, optimistic, hopeful, I guess, that Charlie Baker, when he came in, might make a difference. And unfortunately, he's as dreadful as Mark Emmert was. And I'm a trustee at my undergraduate school, Central Michigan, where I played a little baseball. I'd already wrecked my spine from high school football, and since coach, I've had 4 spinal fusions, so might not be walking if I played football in college, even though it was my best sport. But I serve on the board of trustees there, and our president had 2 years ago nominated me for the NCAA Board of Governors. There's an open seat. I knew it wasn't going to happen. I told him, you got to be kidding if you think they're going to put on their board the guy who's thrown more rocks at them than anybody out there. But it's not that I hate the NCAA. I hate its incompetence and its failures from a leadership standpoint.
Well, a couple of things that tie into that are right in that lane. When I was at Maryville College, my second year of recruiting there, I had done it long enough to see, how it worked. And I pulled a couple of families aside and said, you don't want to do this, because they were so excited. They were getting a quote scholarship, but it was financially packaged just like USD, but I had access to all of their finances because it's part of the packaging process. I said, you'd be better off walking on at West Alabama than doing this from a financial standpoint, and just give up the splash of I signed a scholarship.
Yeah.
And then with our high school kids that I coached over the years, we would take the scholarship offers that they were given and we would sit down and go over them with them, because so many of these kids were first time ever college attenders. Their families they're totally trusting me. And folks wondered, why are you so actively involved in this? Well, because this school said this get a scholarship and it says full in conjunction with Pell. Well, so your scholarship is your Pell Grant money. You're not getting a scholarship. And they didn't know that. They didn't understand that. And and over the years, the stuff that you could see just in the writing and the fine print, the way schools did things that were just going to take advantage of our guys, and it was awful. It was immoral in a lot of ways, and we fought it every way we possibly could within our little world, because as you are, and we were there for them. We were servants, and that's what we continue to try to be.
Todd, I'll say this about Coach. He's kicked more coaches off of Davidson High School campus than anybody I know, and I'll share some of those off the record with you because you'll get a kick out of them. I think you could probably guess some of them.
Well, in another iteration of all this players' rights movement that's going on, I came to become very close with attorney Tom Mars, who, has been very aggressive in pursuing the NCAA. Man, I have a commanding respect for. Guy was number one in his law class at Arkansas State. He, I believe, led the state police in Arkansas. He was Hillary Clinton's associate for 5 years at the Rose Law Firm in Little Rock, and went on to become the general counsel of Walmart. And he decides to go after the NCAA, Ole Miss, and Hugh Freeze, who's having a nice resurgence at Liberty, or now Auburn, and all in the name of creating mobility for student athletes who get trapped when they get suckered into this deal or that deal by a school
Right.
that locks them down and controls them like chattel, which is the legal term for property. And I don't like today's total free agency, mostly because I think more guys are getting hurt by it than are being helped by it. And we need to rethink that. That needs to be rethought, but it needs to be rethought with somebody representing the players' interests at the table, if not taking the lead, because we know what the university presidents in the NCAA are capable of. They've been showing us, for 50 years, and all they want is all of everything. I know it's made it brutal for some coaches right now to coach. It's also created huge opportunity. Look at, Dion out at Colorado. He brings in, his roster rolls over 80, 90 players.
And every time you say Dion on our show, somebody puts the shades on. So you that or Prime or Colorado.
I think Prime just scored a residual on that, Coach.
He's hopefully
he probably has sold to those.
And Todd, congratulations! Your alma mater beating my alma mater this Saturday. I think we're even on the night stake that we bet from last season. But I'd be remiss if I didn't bring up Michigan State and what they went through with the Mel Tucker situation and get your take on that.
Um, I'll give you a kind of a deep take. So go way beyond just the superficial. So I'm going to guess 6, 7 years ago, my friend Jim, Coach Harbaugh, does something that inspires me. He brings in Brenda Tracy from Oregon, who is a rape survivor, to speak to his team and educate guys about being really, really smart and respectful. Nobody runs a program that's more respectful to women than Coach Harbaugh, and I admire the heck out of that. And he wants to give his guys, an education, an advantage, so they understand, from a survivor, where the pitfalls are. And I see that, and am so inspired by it. I go to my dear CMU buddy at the time, the late Dick Enberg, and I say, I'm going to bring her in to speak to the CMU football team. I'm that inspired, and get her contact through, Michigan, of course. Reach out to her, bring her in. She was wonderful in facilitating an arrangement. We can't afford to pay what the big time Power Five schools pay for someone like that. So we caught her at a time when she was doing follow up work and already in Ann Arbor. And when time comes to write the check that Terry and I wrote to pay her for her service to CMU, she says something to me quite remarkable. Todd, would you and Terry mind writing that check directly to a battered women's center shelter in Ann Arbor that I identify, and not to me? And so another one of the stories of, if you judge people based on what they do when nobody's looking, I'm telling you right now, that was 5, 6, 7 years ago, and I got goosebumps all running up and down my spine and my arms. So there are those that want to discredit her in this. And I see all the sarcastic humor on social media, but you can't speak much more loudly than being highly, highly credible and committed to the cause when nobody's looking. So that's my personal Brenda Tracy story. So, second reflection on that, Jim raised the bar for Big Ten coaches. He raised the bar by bringing somebody in like that. It's another Jim Harbaugh innovation, and it puts pressure on other programs to follow. And Michigan State followed. They did not lead. They followed by probably more than 5 years, and we saw what happened. Their coach couldn't handle it, and he made a very, very, very serious misstep. So, what do I say about, a coach whose program was involved in Tunnelgate, the helmet swinging, fracas after the Michigan game a couple of years ago, who stumbles badly like that? I wish him the best. Created enormous problems. His character, it's been on full display to me and the public through those two episodes. I think Michigan continues to raise the bar, putting pressure on other programs. Look at what they did to Ohio State this weekend. Look what side of their coach we saw, just because Michigan essentially, I was going to say trucked, but I won't do that. I don't want to create billboard material. Trucked Ohio State in the last two matchups, and that causes Lou Holtz to make, his observational comments about Ryan Day's Ohio State teams. And I know you're an Ohio guy, boy, Brian, although I know you're not a Buckeye fan. And again, that's Jim raising the bar, and we're seeing who cracks and who can handle the additional pressure. Right now, I'd say Ryan Day's not handling it that well, and I clearly think that Mel Tucker, didn't handle it very well. I was certain the minute I heard that he coached his last game at Michigan State. How can they bring him back after the way they handled the Nassar situation? So Those are two insights, I think, on the Tucker thing. One about Brenda Tracy and her credibility, and two about how that upward pressure to compete at an even higher level, which Michigan is bringing, particularly to those two relationships, has put pressure on both coaches.
And
That's how I see it.
well, we've got you on here, and just not to change the topic, but what we've kind of agreed on is we feel sorry for Mel Tucker's family, and that's kind of the way that we look at it. But conference realignment, I know you've been somebody that has been on the forefront of knowing what was going to happen before it happened. Where do you see it going in the future? Obviously, there's rumors that Florida State and Clemson are interested in coming to the Big Ten. I'm sure Greg Sankey's not going to sit there and just let that happen. But maybe I'm assuming too much. So what's your take on that, Todd?
Well, I believe you know that I'm close friends with Florida State Athletic Director Michael Alford. He was our wonderful athletic director at Central Michigan, and I'd love to have Florida State in the Big Ten. I don't know whether that can happen. I think it's here's my number one take. If you look at the U.S. by satellite at night, satellite images, take a look, Google it sometime, if not now, U.S. by satellite at night. It'll tell you every single thing you need to know about college football realignment. What you'll see is the United States, East Coast, West Coast, Mississippi. The East Coast, east of the Mississippi is all lit up. It's all bright. And from the west out, you got a little light in Seattle. You got a big light in the Bay Area and a big light in LA and San Diego, but it's mostly dark. Those are the eyeballs who are watching college television. That's where our population is. And that tells you everything you need to know about why and where the Big Ten and the SEC are expanding. And they control the eyeballs. And we all know, it's not a news flash, that money now is the number one driver in college football, right? Well, the money flows where the people are, where the subscribers are, where the streamers are. That to some extent that'll change a little bit because we're in this transformative stage where the young kids. I have two University of Michigan grads in my family, one law, one undergrad, mid-30s guys. Neither one of them watches a televised broadcast on a TV ever. They're watching on their device, on the run, or streaming. Neither one of them probably has ever subscribed to cable or a satellite package in their lifetime. They take their data, they get their information, their news, their sports, everything through streaming. So, but the money is obviously being driven by where the eyeballs are, and you can see where the eyeballs are just looking at the U.S. at night by satellite. So that's one take. I fundamentally believe that we need to kind of professionalize the Power 5, 3, 2, whatever it is. I sit with a fiduciary responsibility on the board at Central Michigan in the MAC, a mid-major. And I also have very, very, very deep ties, and allegiance to the University of Michigan. They live in two completely separate worlds in terms of, the funding of athletics in general and football in particular. I worry a lot about the mid-majors, and I think they create a ton of opportunities for people, the athletics there. California did something bizarre in that they taxed UCLA $10 million a year of their Big Ten TV money, and it goes to Cal, who didn't get the invitation. Question, do we need a similar model in the Midwest where the Big Ten schools, or maybe the two Michigan schools, Michigan State, have to kick off some percentage of TV revenue or what have you. 10% would be 5.7 million right now. Each, that would be almost 12 million that the three MAC Michigan schools could share. Maybe it's 0.5%. I don't know, but it kind of acts as a tax. I've long felt that the university presidents were remiss through the NCAA and not taking some of the economic steam out of football. What do I mean by that? No, I don't want football to be smaller than it is. But if you, in your conference, basically agreed that everybody was going to have a cap on their spending, on facilities, on coaches, whatever, and the rest of it's going to go somewhere. I don't care, scholarships, academic side, or whatever. I know Jim Harbaugh is a guy who is happy as a clam making $80,000 a year at USD, coaching in 2003. I think I have that year right. And I know what he makes now, and I'm happy that he makes that, and he's worth it. He's worth way more than that to Michigan when you factor in the advancement monies that flow into the university, which is a couple $100 million a year that support the university, have nothing to do with athletics or football. But I just wonder, where it all ends, and can't we be a little bit smarter? There's absolutely not an ounce of wisdom at the NCAA level. Luana Simon, the former Michigan State University president, is a fellow member of my my country club here at our Michigan home, the summer and fall place, and she was the president of the NCAA in the 2012 and 14 timeframe. I believe that she proposed essentially what I'm saying, that you break off the Power Five, essentially incorporate them. I think what she meant by that is officially make them a business and treat them differently than the rest. What does Ohio State, Alabama, and Michigan football have in common with Williams and Amherst football? The ball's the same shape, but the equipment's roughly equivalent. But you can't govern all those things together, and it's crazy to even
a couple of things along those lines.
I'm seeing a countdown here. Does that mean we're in the home stretch,
not
Brian?
Not quite yet. Coach had something, and then we'll close after you address Coach's.
Couple of things I did want to ask you about that tie all that together. One, all the way back to Coach Harbaugh at USD. As a former high school coach, it appears that the mid-majors, or in this state, South Alabama, Troy, even Jacksonville State, North Alabama, that they're going to be basically developmental programs for the bigger schools. The bigger schools will be able to just pick and choose the best of those players if they want to, and not recruit high schools anymore, except for the 5-star kids. The 3-star kids they've been signing and developing at the big Power 5 schools, they don't have to do that anymore. They can let the smaller schools develop these players, feed these players, grow these players, all that stuff, and then take them after 2 years if they want to, and do it that way. Do you see that type of trend happen?
Yeah. Well, we've talked a lot about that, Coach, and thought a lot about it. We're already, and have been for some time, on exactly that model as to the coaches, right? The MAC schools will feed the Big Ten and bigger schools, and so on and so forth. It's only natural that happen with the talent. One of the consequences of COVID and where we are now in college football is that quarterback talent. Now, remember, I'm around my friends Cam Cameron, a quarterback and a quarterback coach, and Tom House, dealing with a lot of the highest level, quarterback talent developing in the country, from Brady and Breeze all the way down to, Connor Wegman at A&M and J.J. McCarthy at Michigan, and so on and so forth. Jaden DeLoria at Arizona. The young quarterback talent isn't getting developed in college now. You have to be ready and pretty close to a finished product, because what House has discovered is the science of growth. And there's a formula, an algorithm he uses that for every year you've grown, in the year that you grow the most, and every pound you gain, there's a neurological equivalent. So the tall kid, I think of Dan McGuire's brother, Mark McGuire's brother Dan, who was like a 6'8" quarterback at San Diego State. He was tall and gangly. So, and I watched Tom and Cam work with Rick Meyer's son, Charlie, a young developing quarterback baseball talent at Stanford right now. And Charlie was 6'6", 245 as an 11th grader in high school at Cathedral Catholic. Went undefeated his senior year. He's clearly a developing talent, but he wasn't all the way there yet, because in 1 year he had grown 6 inches and 50 pounds. And the algorithm is, if I have it right, and I think I do, for every inch you grow and for every 5 pounds you grow in your single year of greatest growth, Charlie's case, 6 inches, 6 months, 50 pounds, 5 more, or 50 pounds, 2 months. So he was 16 months neurologically behind other kids who've been at a normal growth rate, which means it's going to take essentially 2 years longer for him to develop. It really quantifies how the tall, lanky kid, projects, and when you can find, their coordination peak.
Right. Sure.
And Tom's quantified that. And so nobody's taken a chance on the tall. I wonder whether the Tom Brady out of, Sarah High and San Mateo, tall, gangly, slow kid gets developed in today's college football world. I think what you just said, Coach, is the best chance, to do it at the mid-major or the other level and move on. Kind of exactly what Jim was proposing for Josh Johnson back in the early 2000s. And Josh just happened to really find a fit for himself at USD. But we're killing quarterback development right now, I believe, in college.
Well, and I'm a quarterback guy. I mean, I've played quarterback in college, coached them my whole life, worked the Manning Academy for 10 years. I mean, that's my heart and soul as a coach, is working and developing quarterbacks. We had a kid, Cephas Johnson, who's with the Tampa Bay Bucks now, who, as a high school kid, went from 5'10" to 6'4" in 1 year. And all of a sudden, every time he walks by, his shorts have gotten shorter. And you're like, holy cow, look at what is going on with him. His brother plays at Ole Miss as a defensive lineman, Cedric. And same thing. And the other thing was, he graduated from high school, which happens so much nowadays, how old they are when they come out of high school. He graduates from high school at 17 years old. And has all these expectations of him at South Alabama. He never really sees them through. He plays his best football at Southeast Louisiana his 5th and 6th years, and is now 240, 250 pounds, and is ready to go and makes an NFL team. Both things, what you were talking about, but also how many kids years ago, your best players graduated from high school. They had failed elementary school somewhere along the line. They're playing as 18 or 19. They're playing as 18 or 19-year-olds in high school, and they're playing men against boys. And now it's turning around and they're graduating at 17.
Little League team of the 90s.
Yeah, exactly. I know my best teams were loaded with 18 and 19-year-olds. When we started playing with 16, 17-year-olds, we started getting smacked.
My dad was ahead of the game.
So Tom is deeply in all that science.
My dad was ahead of the game on that. I was president of my preschool class 2 years in a row, and I turned 18 my senior year right as school began. So I think he thought it'd be bigger than 5'10".
Parents,
145 pounds though.
Sure. Parents ask me all the time, what's the most important thing to helping my child develop and be a quality high school athlete and possibly college athlete? I say, 1, good genetics, and 2, redshirt them the first year. Do not start them in school because they can color between the lines and check all the boxes. Hold them back a year, and don't start them in elementary school for until a later year, especially these kids born in July. Born in the summer, and they throw them in school too early, and then then when they turn 19, they grow 4 inches. And they
It's interesting because my father was a PhD educator, and the flip side of that is usually the brightest kids in a class, a high school or an elementary school class, are the youngest because they're bright, but they pay more attention because they're younger. And the older kids have a greater tendency to get bored. And so the flip side is it may not be the optimal spot academically. So
they're certainly more high maintenance. There's no question about that.
But
yeah.
I appreciate you coming on, Todd, and everything that you've done for my family over the years. The Godfrey's Hardballs, anytime I pick up the phone, you answer quickly. And I've got a friend of yours coming on Friday, the Unblocked podcast, Jay the Bee Flannelly. So trying to keep Jay a little on the PG side might be a challenge. We definitely will not be doing that live. So, but I thank you for
best Michigan friend of Tom Brady.
Yeah, and
you'll find that Jay was breaking down film every week throughout Brady's entire career of his upcoming opponent and sharing it with them. Pretty cool story.
I'll share this story with you because you'll find it quite funny, and I don't think I've ever even told you that. Everybody told me you have to meet Jay, and of course I read John U. Bacon's book, so I kind of knew what was going on when we finally came up and visited Jim and Jack and Jackie and Sarah. And everybody said, you got to meet Jay, you got to meet Jay. So I go to the pizza house wearing a Baltimore Ravens sweatshirt, and my ex-wife was with me, and my daughter was wearing a number 4 Michigan jersey. And I said, is Jay around? Because I wanted to meet this legendary Jay Flannelly. And he came out and he said, I don't want anything to do with you, because I was wearing the Ravens sweatshirt. And he said, in fact, I wouldn't order food if I were you. And I looked at my ex-wife and I said, do you think he's serious about not ordering food? And she said, absolutely. She said, we can go down the road to a different restaurant. But him and I have become friends, and that's one of my must-see people. Every time I'm in Ann Arbor, we usually go somewhere and eat and get to talk. And when Jay talks football, it's kind of like you on so many different issues. I learned so much by just being around great people, and appreciate you taking the time to come on the podcast today.
Yes, sir. Awesome,
pleasure,
Todd.
gentlemen.
Yeah,
good luck.
Very good. Appreciate you. Thank you.
We're done recording, but thank you very much, Todd.